I want to start this episode the same way my Uncle Byron started his own eulogy, with a joke. My Uncle Byron wrote his own eulogy before he passed away, and that alone tells you the kind of man he was. Even when he knew what was coming, even when he knew his time was limited, he still wanted to make people laugh. And in his eulogy, he said something like, I want to start this off the same way I always do, with a joke that was told to me by my nephew Chewy. And the joke went like this: three Chinese men immigrated to America, and they wanted to sound more American. Their names were Boo, Chew, and Fu. Boo changed his name to Buck. Chew changed his name to Chuck. And Fu went back to China. And the moral of the story is, don't be a fool. And that was my uncle. That was Byron. Humor first, even at the end. And I think about that a lot now, because when someone can face death and still choose to make people laugh, that tells you something about who they are. It tells you something about the way they carry themselves. It tells you something about the way they wanted people to remember them. Not just with sadness, not just with grief, but with laughter, with warmth, with the same energy he gave people when he was alive. And for most of my life, I think I misunderstood death. I think a lot of us do. We think death is one moment, a phone call, a hospital room, a flat line, a funeral. But sometimes death is not just a moment. Sometimes death is a process. Sometimes grief starts before the person is even gone. Sometimes you begin losing someone while they're still physically here. And that is what happened with my Uncle Byron. For me, it started on Thanksgiving. We were at my other uncle's house having Thanksgiving dinner. My Uncle Byron had just gotten out of the hospital, and his wife drove by the house with him. And that was when I saw him. When I looked at him, something in me recognized it. He looked the same way my papa looked right before my papa passed. And that is a hard thing to explain unless you have seen it before. It was not just that he looked sick, it was something deeper than that. It was in his face, it was in his body, it was in the way he carried himself. It was almost like my heart noticed something before my mind was ready to accept it. I remember seeing him and thinking, I know this look. I had seen it before. I saw it in my papa. And now I was seeing it again in my uncle. But even then, I do not think I fully understood how close were to losing him. Then on the Sunday after Thanksgiving, I saw him again. He was groggy. He was not fully himself. He was there, but was not all the way there. And looking back, I could see what was happening. But in the moment, I still did not think he was going to pass so soon. I knew something was wrong. I knew he was not doing good, but I did not think my mind was ready to accept that it was that close. That it was one of the strange things about watching someone decline. Part of you sees what is happening. Another part of you still tries to convince yourself that there's more time. You tell yourself maybe they'll bounce back. Maybe this is just a bad week. Maybe this is just the medication. Maybe this is just part of the recovery. Because accepting that someone you love is near the end is not something your heart does all at once. It happens in pieces. And for about 2 weeks, I carried that feeling that something was wrong, but not fully knowing how close we were. Then about 2 weeks later, I was coming back from a trip from Sacramento. I remember being on the plane coming home when my dad texted me. He told me my Uncle Byron was going into hospice. And when you hear that word hospice, it changes everything. Even if you already knew things were bad, that word makes it real. Hospice means the fight has changed. Hospice means the goal is no longer to fix it. The goal is comfort. The goal is peace. The goal is dignity. And when I got that message, I knew we were close to the end. After I got back, I went to go see him again, and that visit was different. He was more coherent. He was awake. He was not groggy like he had been before. He was clear enough to talk. He even stood up out of his bed and went to the bathroom. And then when he got back, we really talked. He started telling me about his life. He talked about dating his wife. He told me stories I had never heard before. He talked about the dates they would go on, the things they would do, the way he saw life, the way he looked at things. And I remember sitting there listening to him, realizing that I was hearing a part of his life that I never really knew. Because sometimes we forget that the people we love had entire lives before we understood who they were. They had dreams, they had memories, they had love stories, they had regrets, they had lessons. They had moments that shaped them long before they ever became our uncle, our parent, our grandparent, or whoever they were to us. And in that conversation, I got to see more of the man behind the role. Not just Uncle Byron, but Byron, the husband, the man, the person who lived a life before I was even old enough to understand it. And I knew right there that I was going to cherish that conversation because it felt like he was giving me pieces of himself, pieces of his life, pieces of his story, pieces that I would carry after he was gone. And when the conversation ended, I told him, I love you, Uncle Byron. And in his goofy way, he told me, thank you, Chewy. And that was him. That was so him. It was not dramatic. It was not some big movie moment. It was simple. It was goofy. It was real. And because it was real, it meant even more. Because sometimes the most meaningful goodbyes do not sound like goodbyes when they happen. Sometimes they sound like, thank you, Chewy. And you do not realize until later how much you're going to hold on to that. Because that was probably that was the last real conversation I had with him. And I think that is why I hold on to it so tightly. Because when someone passes, you start replaying everything. The last time you saw them, the last thing they said, the last time they laughed, the last time they looked like themselves, the last time you got to tell them you love them. And for me, I'm grateful that I got that. I'm grateful that before he passed, I got to sit with him while he was clear enough to talk. I got to hear stories. I got to see pieces of his life. I got to say I love you. And even though his response was goofy, even if it was simple, even if it was just, thank you, Chewy. I know he heard me, and that matters. It matters because grief has a way of making you wish you said more. It makes you wish you asked more questions. It makes you wish you had more time. But sometimes you do get a moment, not a perfect moment, not a movie moment, but a real one. And that was mine. After he passed, life kept moving. That is one of the hardest things about grief. The world does not stop just because your world changed. People still got to go to work. Cars still drive by. Planes still take off. Bills still come in. The sun still rises. And everybody else's life keeps moving even while you're trying to figure out how to live with someone else missing. And that is one of the cruelest parts of loss. You can lose someone who helped shape your life. And the next day, the world still expects you to function. You still have to answer messages. You still have to show up. You still have to keep going. And that is where grief gets strange because the person is gone. What they gave you is still here. Their voice is still here. Their humor is still here. Their lessons are still here. Their examples are still here. And over time, you start realizing that maybe the point is not to move on from them. Maybe the point is to carry them forward. A few months after my uncle passed, I got to babysit my cousin's son for the first time, my nephew. And that moment hit me harder than I expected. Because just a few months earlier, I was sitting with my uncle, thinking about the kind of uncle he had been to me. And I was sitting there with my nephew, thinking about the kind of uncle I was going to be to him. That's a heavy transition because most of my life, I was the nephew. I was the younger one. I was the one looking up. I was the one being influenced, receiving the lessons, even when I did not realize they were lessons. But now I'm stepping into a different role. Now I am becoming the uncle. Now I am the one who has to think about what kind of example I'm setting, what kind of presence I am giving, what kind of man this little boy is going to remember me as when he gets older. And that made me think about my Uncle Byron in a completely different way. Because I did not just want to say he was influential in my life, I want to live in a way that proves he was influential in my life. I want to take what he gave me and pass it forward. I want my nephew to feel the same kind of steadiness from me that I felt from my uncle. I want him to know that I am someone he can count on. I want him to know that I am someone who will show up, someone who will make him laugh, someone who will protect him, someone who will teach him without making him feel small, someone who will be present in his life, because I think that is what real legacy is. Legacy is not just what people say about you when you're gone. Legacy is what people become because you were there. And if I could be to my nephew even a fraction of what my Uncle Byron was to me, then I think I'll be doing something right. Because when I think what kind of uncle I want to be, I do not think about being perfect. I do not think about having all the answers. I think about being present. I think about showing up. I think about teaching through action. I think about letting him see what it means to be strong, but also kind. What it means to laugh, even when life is heavy. What it means to take care of your family. What it means to carry yourself with love. What it means to be someone people feel safe around. And I want him to know that life is not always going to be easy. I want him to know that he's going to lose people. He's going to face pain. He's going to have a moment where life does not make sense. But I also want him to know that love does not disappear when someone dies. It changes form. It becomes memory. It becomes influence. It becomes the way you treat people. It becomes a lesson you pass down. It becomes the story you tell. It becomes the jokes that still make people laugh after someone is gone. And maybe that is why the joke matters so much to me. Because it was not just a joke. It was a piece of my relationship with my uncle. It was something I told him that he carried with him. And then he carried it into his own eulogy. And now I get to carry it here. And that is legacy. A joke becomes a memory becomes a story becomes a lesson. And a lesson becomes something you pass down to the next generation. Don't be a fool. When I babysat my nephew, I started to understand that in a way I had not before. I'm not just carrying grief, I'm carrying responsibility, carrying love, carrying the example my uncle gave me. And now I have to decide what I'm going to do with it. Because one day I'm going to be gone too. When the day comes, I hope my nephew can look back and say about me what I say about my Uncle Byron. That I was there, that I mattered, that I helped shape him, that I made him laugh, that I taught him something, that I was one of the most influential men in his life. Not because I demanded that title, but because I earned it through how I loved him, through how I showed up for him, through how I lived in front of him. That is the kind of uncle I want to be. And that is the kind of man my Uncle Byron helped teach me to become. And that brings me to James. James is one of my oldest friends. We met in 8th grade in math class, and we have been friends ever since. And when you know someone that long, you do not just know the version of them that exists today. You know the different version of them. You know who they were when they were young. You know who they were before life really tested them. You know the jokes, the memories, the dumb moments, the growing pains, and the part of their story that most people never get to see. And James' story is one that I think matters because, like me, he understands what it means to lose people who helped shape him. But his loss came in a way that forced him to grow up fast. He lost both of his parents in his mid-20s. During a time when he was still figuring out his own direction in life. And now, years later, he is a father. So when I think about what it means to carry someone's legacy forward, I didn't only think about my Uncle Byron. I think about James. I think about what it means to lose the people who raised you and still find a way to become someone your own child can look up to. Because grief does not only take from us, sometimes grief forces us to become the person someone else is going to need. So for this episode, I want to sit down with James and talk about his parents, what they gave him, what he lost when they passed, and how becoming a father changed the way he understands their love, their sacrifice, and their legacy. because this episode is not just about death, it's about what we do with the love people leave behind, and it's about how one generation shapes the next. Here's my conversation with James. There you go. Okay. All right, James, tell me what it was like growing up and life with your parents.
Life was pretty good. Grew up in a one-bedroom apartment place. Me, my sister, my mom and dad, we all slept in the same room together. It was pretty crammed, but growing up, my parents never really did make it feel like that we were living poor. Everything that we asked for, we got. We always had food. You look at me when I was younger, I was a chubby baby. But now when I look at it, I think back, I'm like, wow, we were pretty broke. We were poor. We were living paycheck to paycheck. But you know what? To me, it was the best childhood that I could ever have asked for. Yeah, we might have not gone on any kind of vacations or anything, but to me, it was one of the best childhoods ever.
All right. Tell me like what happened to your so sorry for your mom. Tell me what happened to your mom. How does she pass?
Yeah, so my mom passed. She suffered an aneurysm in her sleep, and just to go into a little bit of kind of like what happened. One morning, my dad came running into my room, waking me up, letting me know that something was wrong with my mom. And then I went to go check on her, and she was like, sounded like she was choking and like having like labored breathing. And that's when we called 911 to come. And at first, I just thought she was choking, but we found out at the end of it, she was pretty much like brain dead. That was just the body's natural reaction to not having any brain function.
What was it like seeing your mom like go through that? And I'm assuming like the firefighters show up,
Yeah,
EMT show up.
it was pretty tough. It I will never forget it. These firefighters came into my house. My little dog was still running around, and I seen them basically they not really drag her out of the room, but they kind of like dragged her out to the living room because she was in our bedroom. And then they started like, doing chest compressions. And I just in that moment I just felt so helpless. Like, I was just standing there, like, to see if there's anything I can do. But, I was just yeah, it was a pretty shitty situation.
Can you tell me about like what was it like for you right after losing your mom? Like how did like was there any depression? Did you start feeling isolated or alone at that time yet, or was it just
So at that time, not really. I didn't feel isolated, but it was a very like terrible, like coming home that first night after finding out that my mom was brain dead. You know, I walked past my parents' room because my room is right next to my parents' room. I saw my dad, you know, on his hands and knees crying. And for me, I looked up to my dad as like, this successful person, this real masculine person in my household, somebody I looked up to, my idol. And just seeing him like on his hands and knees crying and not knowing what to do. I went to my room and I locked the door and just cried my eyes out. And yeah, I cried for like 3, 4 hours, and I just asking God to bring back my mom. And just, is there anything I can do to make this better?
and then tell me about your dad. What was your dad like for you? Like before you like even before he passed, like what did he mean to you?
My dad was my hero, someone that I really looked up to, gave me pretty much gave me everything I know today. He pretty much helped, like he was like he laid the foundation for that. Um
Like I know like for me, like from the outside observing your two's your relationship between you and your father, right? It was pretty close. Like tell me about the tattoo you got on your back.
oh yeah, my dad had put a kanji of our last name on his back, and he had it done a long time ago. At first, like, my parents or my dad was kind of, like, against getting tattoos, but, he ended up letting me get that tattoo because I wanted to look like him, and I have it in the same spot as where he has it. And he also let me get a tattoo from my mom too. We spread our ashes out at Kailua Beach, so I got the Mokulua Islands tatted on my shoulder and her name under it, just to kinda remind me, like, she might not have like an actual like graveyard, but I can always go out to Kailua Beach and give my pay my respects to her.
Do you ever go out there now just to reflect on her?
Yeah, at least once a year, I usually go out, do a little, small kind barbecue. Of course, like, the first like year after it happened, we did like a big party. But nowadays, like, I'll just go out and just, maybe get a bento. And she was always like, or sorry, she always used to like drinking Coca-Cola, so I'd always bring like a little bottle of Coca-Cola, pour it in the ocean, and have some with her.
Yeah. And then, then you get up to like, it's not go quite into what when your dad died, but tell me about like what he was going through the year or two before he passed away. Like what was going on with him health wise?
Yeah, so um like maybe a week or two after my mom died, his body, I guess, started shutting down. Found out that he was in kidney failure, so he had to be put on dialysis. And then on top of that, his he had diabetes, and his vision was going like, I wouldn't want to say he was completely blind, but he would always have these things called, like, I guess, bleeders in his eye where blood would obstruct his vision, and in order to fix that, he would always have to get LASIK surgery. So I would always have to, take him anywhere, take him to work, to take him to dialysis, or he used, like, public transportation, the handy van and stuff.
I think so. Having lost your mom, and then knowing your dad wasn't in great shape, were you like pre grieving him, like preparing yourself for his death at all?
Yes, and I think that's why I also kinda, like, don't really have a lot of, like, regretful feelings for my dad because, going through this experience with my mom, just one one night I tell her, "Good night, I'll see you tomorrow morning." The next morning, she's not here anymore. So, getting these, signs from these doctors that, "Hey, your dad's not gonna live for this long. His health's not doing too good." We definitely took advantage of it. Like, every weekend we went out, we went fishing, we drove all over. We would go out to Wailua almost every weekend to go to Paolakai's, get, like, the little two-piece chicken and musubi rice. That was, like, a little go-to. Um, yeah, and just fish a lot, try to catch a ulua, and just have the time of our lives.
So, one thing that I remember about you was, I think you said it earlier was you're you're a much more larger person when I first met you.
Yeah.
And now you're probably you're in great shape. You're in the military. What was any part of your weight loss because of the way your mom went and the health issues that your dad had? Did that kind of was that what motivated you to lose your weight at all?
Yeah, of course, seeing, my mom had diabetes too, and, all of the doctors would have said all of that played a contributing factor, like her heart was weak, her body was weak, her immune system was weak, and then seeing firsthand what dialysis, is, and watching my dad go to that 3, 4 times a week, getting like a double zero, I don't even know if that's the right needle, but a fat needle getting poked into his arm, and it sucked, man, and he has to sit in that chair for, like, 45 hours, just watching that, I just saw that and said, "Man, I can't do that," like, and he even told me, he's like, "This is gonna be you if you keep, pounding away or eating your life away, if that makes you feel better, you're full, but, right now I regret all of that," and, I seen him go through that, and I didn't want my son or my children to go through that.
Yeah, I remember like personally, like I got pretty large too at one point. Yeah, I think you remember that, and it even affected me a little bit, like, seeing the way your parents left and then seeing you lose all that weight, and so, like, that motivated me too to drop more. I'm still trying to lose weight at this time, just trying to drop down. Tell me about, what had happened with your dad, like, I know your mom was kinda sudden, right? She kinda just one was normal one day as you explained, and then one night just it changed and she got brain dead, right?
Yeah.
But it sounds like from what I remember and what you're telling me now is that your dad had this like slower process of getting to his death. Like tell me about that and lead up until the day he died.
So yeah, so my dad's death, so yeah, it was I would say, yeah, it was a lot better. I got to spend more time with him, got to know like, he was gonna pass pretty soon. Well, one of the things that happened, which it to me, and this is what kind of like sticks with me to this day, because I do this is one of the things I grieve. Like I feel this thing almost every day. He had like a foot infection on his feet, and my dad had he had an amputated toe, and he also had an amputated pinky toe, and on his other, like, I think his middle toe, I guess his foot was rubbing against a slipper, so he got an infection. And, knowing from the past that an infection on my dad, because he's diabetic, leads to an amputation, me being so overprotective, I pretty much kind of forced my dad to go to the doctor to get it checked, or go to the castle to get it checked out, because I could smell it. It was a little, it smelled a little stink. And that's like a tell sign that, the skin is dying, or the infection is spreading rapidly, and you don't want it to, go to their heart. I'd rather have him like, with a cut off ankle than him being dead, right? So yeah, kind of forced him to go to the hospital. He didn't like it, but he did it. Forced him to go to Castle, and that was it. I went for a hike, and I just got a call from the doctor, and the doctor said there was a complication during your father's surgery, but he's in recovery, and you'll be able to see him tomorrow. And when the doctor said that, I thought something was a little off. So I tried calling my dad. I called him like numerous of times. And usually, like, even though he's in the hospital, he picks up the phone, but he didn't this time. And so I knew something was wrong. But and so that was in my gut. I just couldn't sleep that night. I just felt
When
something was
when the
wrong.
doctor said there's a complication, did you at that point did you know like did you think that your dad had already passed?
No, I just thought it was just maybe like his blood pressure dropped or something. But yeah, so we ended up finding out the next morning when I called to see if I could see him, because he wasn't answering his phone. They told me on the phone, like, "Oh, did a doctor talk to you?" And I was like, "Yeah, I heard there was a complication." They're like, "Oh no, he had suffered a cardiac arrest." And right now, like, you can see him, but we're chilling his body to let his brain heal. We don't want his body to overwork, or we don't want his brain to overstimulate. We want his brain to heal itself, because we don't know how long he was under like cardiac arrest for. And in that moment, it was the same situation as my mom. Brain dead, going to the hospital room, tubes in the mouth, just the same thing. Like, can't even say goodbye, or just,
So he was still alive at that time though.
well,
But he
yeah,
was
he was,
he was
yeah,
brain
brain
dead.
dead, yeah, still alive.
Huh. Alright. Well, and then, as today, like what values did your parents give you that you feel are still guiding you right now after they passed?
Yeah, so something that my dad always taught me is, you know, strive to be the best in whatever you do, and don't be complacent. And I see that in myself today. Like, everything that I do, I try my best to be the best that I can be. I'm always like looking at ways to self-improve. Like, when it comes to my job, I'm always trying to look into new, new equipment, how they operate.
One thing that kinda stuck with me when we started talking about this was that you mentioned feeling isolated after the passing. I think a lot of people feel that. I definitely feel that, and both my parents are, still alive, but, when I think about the trauma that I went through, I feel isolated, what was that experience been like for you?
Yeah, it definitely sucked. I mean, there is no really like nice word that I can really put it. Like, yeah, it just sucked really bad, and there's no easy way to put it. Um, I just kind of felt like my whole world was crashing in on me, and my dad was like, my rock. he was like everything I knew, and you know, it was kind of hard. I felt like I couldn't even breathe.
If you go back to the isolated part, like, how did you feel like after your parents passed, like, dynamics of relationships with other people changed? Like, you talked about people telling you that you had to do certain stuff after they died. I know,
Yes, I won't say any names, but you know, it sucked. Like I didn't even get the chance to grieve. I had people telling me that night that we took my dad off the took my dad off the machine, the life support
so
machine.
did you feel like, you know, it was kinda a moment where it's your time to make a decision while other people were trying to make the decision for you?
Yeah, I did feel like other people were trying to make the decisions for me, but had to step my foot on it. I knew what was best in my heart, what to do.
So, you recently just had a son, right? Um, is there anything you hope to do differently as a father than what you experienced growing up?
Yeah, so like I shared earlier, like we kind of grew up in poverty, and I know like yeah, things happen for a reason, but growing up like that, my dad did what he had to do to try to make me and my sister's life better than what he had. We had cell phones growing up. We I was able to have a car when I was a junior in high school. Even though it was an old beat up car, it's a blessing. It was a car. So yeah, what I would do differently is I wanna do the same thing like my father did, but tenfold it. I wanna be able to take my kids on vacation and not just spoil them, but show them the world. I wanna take them to, like, historical places, cathedrals, not just, like, Disneyland, like, actual, like, places where they can learn about this world. I also wanna, yeah, just provide for them stuff that I never had growing up. And education is another one, like, I mean, I don't wanna force education on them, but I wanna educate them and tell them that, you know, education is, like, a key, if you get, certain degrees are better than others, and if this is your interest, like, for example, like, I work in the trades. I mean, I wouldn't really want my son to just be a mechanic. I'd rather him be an engineer to be the one to design the stuff that we fix, you know, not
Trying to
bust ass every day.
trying to lean more on your son, like, when he gets older, what do you want him to know about his grandparents? Mm, and how would you explain his grandparents to him?
So yeah, this is something I always thought about and I still think about today. And me and Miranda always talk about this, and yes, this is a really good question. And I just want him to know that, his grandma was, one of the most loving people. Um, I was able to talk to her about anything, girls, just problems in school with other people. And, I just knew she was gonna kinda somewhat tell me what I wanted to hear, but, just kinda support me, be that supportive role. And for his grandpa, my dad, like, he was like, really a really, like, prominent person in the judo community. He always, I grew up watching him, be a judo coach, and I seen how the way he, like, took care of his students. Like, he kinda hanai them as their own kids, and some of my friends to this day, they were a part of, like, these sleepovers that we had at my house, like, they really do miss that from him. And yeah, I just want him to know that, his dad was or his grandpa was a very loving, caring person.
For, kinda going back to isolating or just the grief and the hardship of losing your parents, like, if you, um if you ran into somebody who was going through the same thing, like, what advice would you give them?
I would tell him, like, it's okay to not feel okay, and that the healing process kinda never ends. You always feel it. It's just a matter of just taking it day by day. And it's okay to ask for help, if you have to talk to someone about it. And it might not even be talking to a psychologist. Like, what the things I like to do is I like to share stories to other people about my parents, and that helps me, like, kinda relive those moments and just makes me feel a lot better. Or just, like, for example, earlier I said me and my dad would always go out to Paalakai. That's something I still do today. I take my girlfriend with me to Paalakai, and then we go to Wailua District Park to go eat under the tree that me and my dad used to eat all the time. And now I get to do the same thing with my son. I get to, maybe not tell him like this is what me and your grandpa used to do, but just doing these things just makes me like have like peace of mind. Just makes me feel better.
Last question that I wanted to ask you was, or maybe not the last question, but one of the questions I'm gonna ask you towards the end here is, a lot of people who lose loved ones, they see that even after their loved ones pass, like they still have somewhat of a relationship with them. Um, that some people say it's even better after they die. Do you think you still have a relationship with your parents to this day?
Yeah, like
I mean, I'm sure it's different, right? It's not a physical relationship,
yeah.
but well, how would you explain that to somebody? Maybe it's different. Maybe the wording is different, but
So
what would you
so
take from
there's
that?
like a few things I like to talk about. For example, when it comes to like fixing things around the house, I'd always like stop and think like, oh, what would my dad do? Like before I just start, like digging down the rabbit's hole to try to find out what's wrong. Like I would just stop, pause, and just, hey, what would dad do? Okay, I'm not a certified electrician, but what are the things he would do? So another thing that I wanted to talk about is so like my accomplishments. So this is another thing I'm still kind of dealing with today. Like say something good happens to me, like finding out that I was gonna be a father, and I still feel like I kinda somewhat kinda talk to my dad, but in my head or talk to my parents, like I would just talk and just be like, hey mom, dad, like, I'm gonna be a father. I really wish you guys were here to, not help me, but just, I just really wish you guys were here and I could see your guys' reactions
Was it actually like words like that, or would you just think like, man, I wish it was here? What would they think?
yeah, that's kinda what I yeah.
And what did they say back to you? Did they say anything back to you?
Yeah, in my head, they're just, we're so proud of you. You're doing such a good job and just keep it up. And then so one thing like me and my dad used to argue a little bit, or well, one thing me and my dad used to argue about is he would always tell me like, you know, there's these times that I'm getting on you, you might be getting irritated and mad at me for getting on you, but you're gonna realize one day why I'm getting on you. And that's something that sticks with me. Like I still think about that today. And that's kind of part of like the things that I kind of talk to them about is like, like dad, I understand why you were so like, hard on me and I was blowing you off, back then and just I don't know why you don't understand. Like you're just old, you don't understand these things. But now I'm looking at it, I'm like, geez, like, he was really like trying to like teach me something there. Like simple things like taking care of stuff around the house, not slamming your door or not leaving the electricity on or leaving dishes stacked in the sink or unclean. And then I realized I was like, that's something that my dad used to always get onto me. And now since I changed, I see other people, I kind of like was getting on them for that. Yeah.
Yes. Do you think if people do you tell people openly that you lost both your parents, and do you think if everyone knew about it that they would, it would help you? Yeah,
Everyone.
go
So for me personally, you know, um, how it usually happens is somebody will ask me like, "Oh, you're gonna go over to your mom's then or what are you doing for your mom for Mother's Day? What are you doing for your dad for Father's Day?" That's usually where I tell them like, "Oh, my dad passed away," and then they find out my mom passed away, and then they just feel bad for me. I usually don't like to just tell people because I guess I don't really like people feeling bad for me. I don't like to feel like you're handicapped for stuff like that. And so that's how it usually comes out is people ask me about it. And For me personally, I don't think it would make a difference if other people, like, knew about my story, or especially at work. Like, I don't feel like it'll make a difference if they knew my story and are working with me. Just I want them to be as raw as they can with me.
Before this episode, I asked James a few questions, not because I wanted to script his answers, but because I wanted to understand the weight of the story we were about to walk into. And in those answers, one thing became clear to me. Grief did not change James's life. It forced him to grow up in a way that life did not prepare you for. He talked about losing his parents, everything happening fast, funeral planning, bills, responsibilities, trying to protect his house, trying to find work, trying to keep going while still not having the time or space to fully grieve. It's something he wrote really stuck with me. Life does not wait for you to grieve. The hospital will bail you that same week. That line says a lot, because when someone dies, the world does not stop. Your heart can be broken, but the responsibilities keep coming. And I think that is something a lot of people do not understand until they go through it. Grief is not just sadness. Sometimes grief is paperwork, phone calls, bills, planning, people giving opinions, people telling you what to do when you have not even had time to process what just happened. And somehow, while all of that is happening, you're still trying to survive the emotional part too. You're still walking into rooms, remembering them, driving past places and remembering them, having moments where you wish this was all just a dream. And James was honest about that. He talked about days where he stayed in bed and cried hard, wishing he could open his eyes and everything would be different. But it wasn't different. And I think that is where healing really begins. Not when the pain disappears, but when you realize the world has changed and you still have to find a way to live in it. James also talks about the lessons his parents left him. His father taught him not to become complacent, to keep improving, to keep working, to remember that hard work beats talent when talent does not work hard. And now James carries that into his own life, into his work, into studying, into learning, into trying to become a better father. His mother's strength is there too, her perseverance, her love, the way that she kept putting family first. And now, as a father, James has the responsibility of carrying both of them forward. His son may not know his grandparents the same way James knew them, but he will know them through James, through stories, through values, through fishing, through judo, through hard work, through love, through the way James chooses to raise him. And that is what this episode leaves me thinking about. The people who are not only remembered by what they did, they remember by the way we continue because of them. Whether that is me trying to become the kind of uncle my Uncle Byron was to me, or James trying to become the kind of father his parents would be proud of. The question becomes the same. What do we do with the love they left us? And maybe the answer is simple. We live it, we carry it, we talk about them, we tell the stories, we let ourselves cry when it hurts, we let ourselves laugh when the memories are good, and we keep showing up for the next generation. Because grief may never fully go away, but neither does love. And if we carry that love the right way, then the people we lost are never completely gone. They're still here in the way we work, in the way we love, in the way we raise our children, and the way we show up for our family, and the way we become someone the next generation could look up to. Until next time, hui hou.